It was a very humiliating experience for a young girl who was in class 5 at that time. Amekuita kwa desk yake, he's showing you something, and then his hand lands on your thigh. And then when you're leaning over, he'd like pinch on your nipples. You still don't have words to describe what is happening. You don't know that this is rape. You don't know that you're being sexually assaulted by your teacher. This teacher was doing this with the full knowledge of the school administration. When some of the female teachers raised an alarm over this because it's like it was happening every year to different girls, the headmistress was like, if they are passing, what is the problem, akiwa gusa gusa? And that statement has never left me because I cannot fathom why a mother would say something like that. But for her, she didn't see us as children. She saw us as marks, scores. Because I may have left the school, but the impact of what it did, I live with it to date. Like my nightmares were made of that school. Farahab Wangoi, that's my name. That's the name my mom gave to me. She named me after my father's mother, who was named Rahab. But the way she used to say it was that she couldn't stand the name Rahab. So she had to find a way to call me Rahab without calling me Rahab. So she added an F-A, and so Farahab. I consider myself something of a superwoman, kidogo. By career, I am a digital marketing expert and consultant. So I help businesses that are looking to grow through the digital space. I help them tell their authentic stories and then utilize these tools for profitability, engagement, and connection. Because, people don't just buy products, they buy who is selling the product. So my job is to help you position yourself so that people trust you and buy from you. So that's what I do most of the time. But I am also a mother. I have, she's now turning 7. Well, hey, Lord God. So I am a mom to a 7-year-old. Actually, she's only 7 for the next 6 months. Then after that, she's 8. But I'm also a daughter. I'm a friend. I believe I am someone who enables people to live out their dreams and just be their most authentic self. So in terms of who I am, I feel like I'm such a dynamic person, but I'm only starting to realize who I am in my 30s. So for anybody in their 20s who's not figured this stuff out, it's cool. You'll figure it out. Like, don't give yourself that pressure. I feel like I spent a lot of my 20s just trying to model or be someone that I don't even know where that idea of me came from. But I feel like I wasted so much time there when I could have just been living. I could have just been traveling. Now you want to travel as a parent and you're thinking, so I'm trying to watch happy. Okay, like there's so much logistics before you even actually get yourself off the couch to that plane or that train or that bus. It's a lot easier when you're 20 and all you have to do is pick up your bag and just bounce for however long and then show up when you show up. My childhood was complicated. I grew up in a family where I had a working mom. She was parenting alone at that time. I do not remember at what point my mom and my dad separated, but I do remember at some point my dad wasn't around anymore. I don't know when that was, at what age I was. But the earliest memory I have of me and my dad is this one time he came to pick me up. I think it was a Saturday. And I'll never forget, hiyo time tulikuwa na kitu inaitwa pink lotion. So my mom slathered my hair in pink lotion. It was looking so dope. I had this cute pussycat kind of style. I think that's what I remember. I remember being prepared for him to come. And I remember getting in his Mercedes. And I remember us going to this place, and it was so posh. And the reason why I felt like it was so posh was because from the driveway, like from where we got in, it was just lined with trees, and it was so cool. It had this posh air, the air was different. There wasn't so much noise. All you could hear was birds. I remember we drove up that winding driveway and we got to the entrance of this big house, and an elderly couple came out to meet us, and they gave me a teddy bear. And to this day, I think those might have been my grandparents. But that's like the most interaction me and my dad had with me as a child. And so for most of my life, I was raised by my mother, and we grew up in a household where she was parenting alone. Maybe from very early on, I was very eloquent. I could express myself. I could say what I wanted. And so I stood out very easily. I had this aura about me where I was not a timid child. Yeah, so I think that got me in a lot of trouble with my mom. I remember there was one time I accidentally drove a hammer into my brother's leg. It was actually a nail. Yeah, it was a nail. I drove a nail. But it was an accident. I promise it was an accident. We were playing and then the thing fell. And my mother looked at me like, is there a return policy? Because this one, But yeah, so that's the kind of child I was. I was very adventurous. I was very outspoken. I was very animated, even as a child, and very creative. I loved music, and I have been told I would be caught numerous times with high heels on, just pretending I'm a star, a celeb, singing in front of hundreds of people. So that's the kind of child I was, very lively. I think I was a delight, but I was also trouble. Yeah, I was also trouble, and especially given how in those days parenting was done, because children had to conform, and they were to be seen, not heard. And so when you have a child who's very outspoken, this is a child you will constantly have fights with because, yeah, they have a mouth on them. They can express themselves. And so I think that's where a lot of my conflict with my mom was. If I could use a word to describe it, was distant. I don't think it's because she didn't love me. I believe she did. I mean, in that time, providing a roof over their heads, clothes on their backs, food on their table, I went to a good school. I think she checked all the right boxes. But in terms of us having a relationship, I don't remember me and my mother sitting down and having like a one-on-one conversation. The first time my mother hugged me, I was going to high school, and I thought, this is so weird. We don't do this. We don't do this affection-y thingy. So what is this? Our relationship was distant. She may have loved me, but maybe she may have lacked the skills to show it. And so for her, the love was in the provision. Which I think, to be fair, it's what she was loving me with the knowledge that she had. Yeah. So that was my childhood. I went to a good school at that time. It's called Lily Academy now. It's in Githurai. And I was bright from very early on. I would win awards constantly, always in the top 3. Like, you're either number 1, 2, or 3, one of those. And being intelligent, and I suppose standing out as I did, it drew attention. And the kind of attention it drew at that time wasn't a good kind of attention. So boys would think I'm very showy. I'm very, I don't know. I think the word I would use is showy, like, teachers would think, she's intelligent, but she's troublesome. Yeah. So I kind of had that dynamic happening for me as a child. And home, they would think she's just trouble. So I kind of felt very misunderstood in all these spaces. And these were the spaces I would spend most of my time in. And early school life was okay. The usual, kuchapwa, nothing out of the ordinary. But when we started getting to that puberty age, and I think I matured very quickly, physically, even in terms of my body, I started to get the attention of male teachers. Okay. And, at that time, without someone speaking to you and telling you, look, first of all, there is no adult that should be attracted to a child. That is not right. That's a crime. And secondly, even as an adult, if a teenager behaves or a preteen behaves in a way that is suggestive, as the adults, it's incumbent upon you to shut it down or find a way to make them understand this is unacceptable and you shouldn't behave like this. Now, one of the teachers that I got the attention of was my science teacher. At that time, it was called Mr. Ngoge. And Mr. Ngoge drew specific attention to me. And at first it was seemingly harmless, it was kind of like he's calling you to show you things on your exercise book. And when you're young, you might know something is wrong because of how it feels, right? So, amekuita kwa desk yake, he's showing you something and then his hand lands on your thigh. And you have no words to say this, but you're thinking, I don't think you have this intuition that I don't think this should be happening, right? But you probably don't have, and at that time, we couldn't speak to our teachers. The children are now able to speak to their teachers now. At that time, they ought to be feared. So that's how it started, very innocently like that. And it became more frequent. And then now it moved away from just those simple hand gestures on your thigh to he'd call you in the staff room. And then when you're leaning over, he'd pinch on your nipples. It's just very odd behavior like that. And over time, it became more aggressive. So when I'd try to resist those things, like when I'd try to resist him touching me inappropriately, he'd beat me. He'd find an excuse to really beat me up. And so eventually I just figured, look, to make my life easy, might as well give in. After that, it was no longer even a hidden thing. Now he'd do it in front of your classmates. He'd call you in the staff room and you'd see the other teachers laughing. And it was a very humiliating experience for a young girl who was in class 5 at that time. It was very humiliating. I think I started to attach shame to myself. So even, being brilliant wasn't a good thing anymore. It wasn't something that now you're proud of. Being who I was, the body that God had given me, now I started to think there must be something very wrong with me, because why would he treat me like this? Because one minute he's acting like he likes you and he treats you well. The next minute it's like he's mocking you or, he's ridiculing you. And he'd have this weird hand gestures that he would do, rubbing the middle of my palm. It would just be such a weird interaction. And now, having gone through years of therapy, I started to realize that what this did, it over-sexualized me. Right? Before I even had the tools or the skills to know, first of all, this was wrong, should not have been happening. But also that, look, this is not even the age for you to be introduced to this thing, right? And there's such a danger there, because after I shared my story, I realized I wasn't the only one. that this wasn't unique to me, that there were other people that he did this to. But again, like I said, I was vocal. And so one of the things that started to happen is the more he did this, the more I hated school, the more I didn't want to show up to school, the more I just did not want to be in that space. And so I would fake things like sicknesses. I would faint in parade. All I really wanted was just to be out of there. But how it was interpreted at that time was I was attention seeking. I was, just being a bad child. And no one was really trying to figure out, but she didn't come to school like this. Like, this is not, she didn't run away from school day one. If throughout she's been fine, and why this shift in behavior after this thing starts? So I was still in the same school, but now I think, and maybe I don't have the right words to express this, but I think maybe as a way of rebellion, or maybe as a way of trying to find my own safe space, I started to have relationships very early on. And unfortunately, I would only date guys who are older than me. So it would not even be boys my age who we could fool around as kids. It would be older guys. And of course, with older guys, it's very sexual because they're also experimenting. They're at the age where they're figuring out their own sexuality. And so what happens is you have this very naive, very unprotected child who is now in very toxic sexual relationships with this older boys. And I think at that time, the words to use, these were not relationships. This was rape. Very early on, I think around class 6, class 7, I started to get treated for STDs and STIs. And I remember there was this clinic we would go to. So there's this one time, I don't know, I faked it or something, but I ended up in this facility. And the lady who was doing the test, I think when she saw the results, she was just shocked. Because what is happening? And I remember she asked the teacher and she said, we need to speak to this girl's parents and we need to speak to the teachers. And, that's when it came out that I'm having sex, that I'm sexually active. Yes. And you can imagine the conversation wasn't, oh, why or how or who. It was, what is wrong with you? And I think I was beaten for it. I don't remember it. It was quite some time back, but I do remember it wasn't an experience that made me feel safe. It was an experience that compounded the feeling of shame that I'd already started getting used to. And so when you feel so much shame and so much disgust for yourself, what happens is this self-loathing, it gets to a place where it becomes overwhelming. And I remember one time I was watching the Oprah show and someone was talking about cutting yourself and how, I think in that time when they were having that conversation, they were saying maybe how, they were dealing with that. But for me, what I heard was it provided relief. See, I had all these things that were bottled up inside me, all these experiences that I was going through. And it was very, very difficult to know how to say it. Because these external things that are happening to you. You still don't have words to describe what is happening. You don't know that this is rape. You don't know that you're being sexually assaulted by your teacher. You don't know they even have a legal right to bring a case against this individual. So all these things, it's kind of like, you've internalized it as there's something wrong with me. That's why they're doing this to me. So I'm the problem, not them. So I started experimenting with drugs, taking pills. I started experimenting with cutting myself. So I became very suicidal, very Yes, just with a razor. So you can still see the scars on my hand. So that's when things became pretty bad. And I do not remember at what point, but at some point, is when my mother realized, okay, we're in trouble. Something is wrong. And we went to a church setting. We used to have a church near our home, and we went and we had this conversation. And I think she just asked me, like, what is going on? And I think I opened up for the first time and I told her everything that was happening. And I just remember feeling like I am the worst excuse of a human being there ever was. I felt terrible. But looking at her face, I could also see she felt defeated. Almost like, those things where you don't know what to do. So we went now to the primary school, and she asked me to repeat, what I had said to her. And there was the headmistress, there was a deputy headmistress, and my mother, and I repeated everything that had happened. And what the headmistress said was, "You're trying to ruin the reputation of my school." It wasn't anger at what was happening to a child. It wasn't disgust at what this teacher who had access to children was doing to children. It wasn't that. It was, how dare you accuse my school of something like this? And let me tell you, after that, I just wanted to die. Like, I just wanted to disappear and die. Because what they did is, they told the teacher what I had accused him of. So nobody went to the cops. Nobody said anything to anybody who could do something about it. But they told him. And let me tell you, my life was a living hell after that. Because he would beat me for anything. Like, anything. To the point I just gave up. I was just like, you know what? I don't care about school. I don't care about this education. I don't care. And I just kind of allowed the physical abuse to continue, because now what do you do? You're not being transferred. You're not being taken out of the school. Now they have started rumors about you in the school that there's something wrong with you mentally. So apparently they had a meeting with other girls in the school, and they told them not to believe anything I am saying because I have problems. So yeah, I don't think after that I remember much of that schooling life. But I can't tell you I didn't like it. I can tell you I hated primary school. Like, to date, I think if I walked into that, I have never been able to walk back since the day I left. I feel like if I go back, I don't know. I get terrified even now, and I don't know if that Ngoge guy is still alive or he died, but I feel like that fear, even now just talking about it, I feel that fear even now, and I'm so many years older. But to date, I still feel that sense of dread every time I would walk. Like, my nightmares were made of that school. For so long, I had nightmares as a child. For so long, I would wake up screaming in the night, bedwetting. It may not have been the only cause, but it played a big role in how complicated my formative years were. And so I did my KCPE. All this was now hush-hush, like, move on, sort yourself out. And I'll say this now because I've decided I'm not going to let people make me afraid anymore. But when I first shared this experience, It was, I shared it and it was shared in, there were other alumni groups. I never joined the alumni group because I felt like I never want to be associated with this place ever again. But it was shared in other alumni groups for the school. And when people were asking questions, what came out was this teacher was doing this with the full knowledge of the school administration. He was permitted. And one statement that has never left me was when some of the female teachers raised an alarm over this, because it's like it was happening every year to different girls. When they raised an alarm over this, the headmistress was like, if they are passing, what is the problem, akiwa gusa gusa? And that statement has never left me, because I cannot fathom why a mother would say something like that. I have a daughter now, and if I think of anybody hurting her, I think I would lose my mind, like it's as a bruh, one of us is going to committee, one of us is going to the grave, But for her, she didn't see us as children. She saw us as marks, scores, without realizing how much damage that one person was doing. Because I may have left the school, but the impact of what it did, I live with it to date. Like to date, I live with the impact of that experience. So eventually I left the school, went on to high school. No, I guess it's by God's grace that God gave me a good head on my shoulders. I passed. And then I went to campus. And that's when I would say shit hit the fan. Because, in campus, you don't have a lot of the restrictions that high school would have. And I would date. I was a serial dater. Like, I think for every year in Campo, I dated a different guy. It's sometimes even more than one guy. And so again, that pattern of being treated for STIs, STDs never really stopped. But what was unique was the type of guys I would choose. I would choose guys who are unavailable. I would choose guys who were toxic, guys who were borderline abusive, guys who would cheat constantly. This would be my type of guys. And I guess maybe now, in retrospect, I think maybe it's because of just how I saw myself. I didn't think I deserved a healthy, stable. Maybe even if I thought I did, I didn't even know how to pick one. Like, what model did I have? Or where would I have learned what a healthy, safe relationship looks like? And I just kept picking what I knew to be familiar. And so, why I have faith, and I think for me, this is my faith story, is in as much as this one part of my life was so chaotic. God loved me so much. He gave me another part of my life that was so stable. And He gave me friends who was so reliable and so consistent. And they would never even get shocked at how messy my life was. Like, there wasn't a time they were like, girl, get yourself together. I think they just loved me through. They're like, you know what, it's okay, babe. He left you. Oh, yeah. And they'd be like, so who is it that left you? Lord. So I had this very messy part of my life, but then I also had this very stable part of my life. And I feel that was God's grace, because if my life had, sustained that momentum of that craziness, that unpredictability throughout, perhaps I would not have been able to slowly start finding my way to what I knew to be safe. So having these girls in my life was so like on any given day, no matter what we were going through, because I'm sure I wasn't the only one who was going through stuff. In fact, all of us were going through stuff, maybe just differently, but all of us were going through stuff. No matter how crazy it got, they always had my back, no matter what. I was the outgoing, the party going person, and I would drag specifically my best friend in campus. I would drag her. Her name is Elena, so I would drag Elena out of the bed, and she would literally go in her pajamas and leg warmers. This is just like, I feel like I should not be here. Like, I don't care as long as you're here, and that just tells you how much they showed up for me. I remember there were times, even getting money to like pay through campus sometimes was a challenge, especially when my grandmother got ill and my mother, wasn't working at that time. She was retired. So money wasn't something that we had very readily available. So sometimes we did struggle with paying like, campus fees. And these girls would changa for me. Like, yeah. So like, we're like, okay, bill me how much? After. Until you figure, sometimes they'd help me write letters to the dean to be like, Aki, please let me do the exam. Like, I don't want to fail. And somehow that's how we made it. Like, we became hustlers that very young. But we became hustlers. And I remember one time we were having a conversation with that friend of mine, Elena. And she was saying, babe, you don't know, you are the reason why we used to eat. Because we're going to plot. I was like, what? Like, yeah, tulikuwa tunaamka asubuhi, we don't know how we're having breakfast. Ukitoka hivi ukirudi hivi umerudi na punch. It's like, wow, okay, ama umeenda umerudi hivi, because we used to sell things like, we used to sell soap. Guys, we were hustlers, yo. But that's what made me start to believe that perhaps I was worth loving. Perhaps I had value. Perhaps I was important, My dad wasn't in the picture for a very long time. My God, my dad was only in my picture when I was born, which is awesome because I was born with a very specific condition called spina bifida. So it can be a life-altering condition if, treatment is not sought early. But at that time, the advantages of having a dad who owned a Mercedes was I could get the surgery I needed very early on and get proper care so that then I had a very normal life. So again, it's complicated because you can't be mad at the guy. Like, yeah, you weren't there for me. True. But then also, because of the resources that he had, I was able to go on and have a normal life when so many other people didn't. And so I say this now, again, in retrospect, because at that time, my dad is not very affectionate. He's not very loving and caring. He's not the kind of guy you go and hug. Maybe he is now, but when I knew him, no, he wasn't the kind of guy you go hug. Like, affection was not his thing. And every time my dad would show up in my life was my mom forcing it. So it just became a tense relationship. And, I didn't feel like his daughter. I felt a lot more like something he had to endure. And so now when I go older, I was just like, yeah, no. Yeah. I'm making the decision now that no, we're just not going to have a relationship. I don't know, but there's an interesting study that was done in the US. A study on pedophiles. And I can't remember when or where the study was, but they were trying to figure out how do pedophiles pick their victims. And so I don't know if it was one person who confessed who said this or if it was a pattern that they identified, but the finding was kind of like they would go into a neighborhood, right? And they would be scouting for a victim. And if they'd approach a child and nobody came out to ask, who are you or what are you doing? Or if there'd be no one who's like, mbona unaongelesha huyo mtoto? they'd know this is a child who's not protected. And that's how they'd pick their victims. So I think if my dad was around, perhaps there would have been an extra layer of protection or even an extra layer of fear for this pedophile. And maybe even the administration, maybe they would have been more afraid if they didn't take action. But I think maybe because at that time, perhaps the school felt like they were doing my mom a favor in the sense that it was one of the best, Lily Academy at that time was like one of the best performing schools in that area. And so the fees was pretty high. And so if you could afford to take your child to that school, you're seen like a very high-end kind of parent. But I don't think my mom was always able to afford fees. And so maybe the compromise was that. Yeah. Maybe that was a compromise. Yeah. I honestly, I don't know. Maybe it would have added an extra buffer or protection around me, or maybe it would have made them more afraid to allow this to continue. Because even at that time, I remember my dad had an influence. So I don't know, honestly. I don't know if Kim being around would have changed anything or not. Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important. And I'm a single parent now myself. And I didn't choose it. I didn't choose to be a single parent. So the person that I got expectant with bails. Like, the first phone call, he was like, no. In fact, the words that he uses, in my spirits, I'm not convinced you're pregnant. Tell you, born again brothers, kidogo. Yeah, we need to go back to the drawing board. But when he said that, I think I quickly realized, oh, wow, I'm still picking the same type of guy. And unfortunately now, I can't just walk away from this. Now I have a child on the way. And again, my friends, remember that group of friends that I told you? I remember calling her and telling her, babes, I'm pregnant. And she was in church. And she texted me and told me, I'm coming. And she came. And I cried and cried and cried and cried and cried. But you know what she told me? Mtoto mmoja hawezi tushinda. Like, oh wow. Mtoto mmoja hawezi tushinda, tutafua maguo, kwani iko nini? And so even if this person walked away, you know, I had this safety net. And they kind of told me, you know, you're not going to do this alone. We didn't have jobs, by the way, at that time when I was finding out I'm pregnant. I think I had like 50K in savings. I was volunteering. I wasn't even working, so I wasn't even like being paid. I had no idea. But they made me feel like I could do this, you know? It was a tough, challenging part of my journey. And especially just knowing that the same thing that happened to me, in the sense that my dad was not going to be around, that's going to be my daughter's story as well. And that thing is to break me like on a daily. I was like, how could I be so stupid? Like, how could I make this decision like this? But you know, I thank God that not one of them came up to me and was like, babe, terminate. Not one of them said that to me. And I think if they had presented that option, maybe I would have considered it. But since it was not presented, it was not even something that we thought of. Like, we didn't even think that this was a choice we had. Again, that's not to say that, you know, people don't have a right to choose. But what I will say is, especially when you find yourself in that situation, do not make a permanent choice over a temporary situation. Where I was when I was expectant is not where I am now. Financially, emotionally. Like, it's not. If I had made that choice then, I think I'd be regretting it now. But it was tough. I'm not saying to anybody that it's going to be easy, and please do not take that impression from me. It was T4 tough. I struggled through that pregnancy. I struggled through labor and delivery. I struggled through the very first years of my daughter's life. And way up until I think she's about 6 years, it was tough. But you know, Now where I am and where she is, things have gotten easier. And I think maybe that's what I'd say about that. Everybody would want and would wish that you would be able to raise your child with, they have a parent. But sometimes because of death, sometimes because they walk away, sometimes life happens and you guys just find if we stay together, we're going to end up nyongaing each other. So, it's better if we're separate. So sometimes life happens and life is messy. But if that happens and you find yourself having to make that make that decision, I think make it with information. Ask, speak to people who can give you good information so that when you're making that decision, because whether you decide to keep or whether you decide to end it, you will have to live with the consequences of that choice. Keeping a child, hakuna square pixels, parenting is full time. There's no breaks. If you choose to end the pregnancy as well, it's going to have its own consequences. And you're the only person who's going to have to live with that. People will be easy to say, yeah, but they're not in your shoe. So make the best decision for you and be ready to own it because it's your decisions, right? So anyway, when I did find out I was expectant and this guy was married, apparently, I knew he was divorced and I knew his wife had taken everything. Now, let me tell you something about narcissists. Narcissists have a very good story to begin with. Kwanza the story for Woishe, pity me. Ay. They will spin you a story up and they'll go, you poor thing. That is exactly what he did, baby. I was just like, you poor thing. On the 21st of April, 2018, I had my daughter. Shortly after that, when she turned 3 months, my mom died. Has your world ever been shaken? You're like, isn't he gonna God? I don't get. Mentally, I really struggled. I was extremely depressed. And this one day I came home and I thought, I don't want to live like this anymore. And in that moment, I thought of buying tablets, putting in her milk, and putting in my food. And we just sleep. It was very dark. It was very cold. And in that moment, a friend of mine called. She's like, hi, how are you doing? Yeah, I'm not okay and I don't know if I'll make it to the morning. And he told me, I'm calling someone. I want you to speak to them right now because you have to make it to the morning. And so it was a therapist and we talked and talked. The only thing I remember from that conversation is she said, whatever you have to do, just hold on until you get to the morning. And I remember telling my nanny, achukue mtoto alale naye, because I knew if I would probably go through with it. So I don't know what I did, but I held on until the morning. And so basically, actually, that is what set me on the path of therapy. That was actually my first journey with therapy.